When their father passed away, he left behind more than memories. He left behind two very different businesses. The first was the family bakery. Everyone in the town knew it. It had fed families for years, and it carried the weight of tradition. The second was something unusual, a small snack processing factory. It was half-finished, and very few people even knew it existed. Samson, the older brother, inherited the bakery. Stanley, the younger brother, inherited the factory. Their mother believed the bakery was the jewel of the family. Relatives shook their heads at the factory. They said it was a waste of money and time. But inheritance is not the same as success. A business only survives if customers still care. That was the first lesson the brothers would learn. Samson opened the bakery at dawn. The smell of bread returned to the street, and old customers smiled. They bought their usual loaves, but they did not buy more. He told himself that keeping things the same would be enough. But in business, habits fill mornings. Growth fills the future. Meanwhile, Stanley visited the factory. It had machines, boxes, and dust. No customers. No products on shelves. Only potential. Instead of producing, Stanley went out to observe. He watched children at schools. He studied what snacks sold fastest in small shops. He noticed what spoiled and what stayed. He came back with notes, not with goods. That was his first step. Discovery before production. Samson tried to raise prices by adding a heritage loaf. It sat unsold on the shelf. He wrote a sign about tradition, but customers cared more about convenience than history. Stanley cut dried fruit into small packs and gave them to a few children. They ate and laughed. Some shared, some asked for more. It was not perfect, but it was a signal. One brother was keeping the past alive. The other was testing the future. The lesson was clear. A business does not grow by assumption. It grows by learning what customers truly want. Samson kept running the bakery the way his father did. He opened before dawn, stacked the shelves with bread, and smiled at every customer. But by midday, sales slowed. Younger buyers passed by without stopping. They preferred the supermarket across the street with faster service and coffee to go. The bakery still had regulars. But regulars are not enough when the market around you changes. A lesson was becoming clear. What worked yesterday does not always work tomorrow. Meanwhile, Stanley turned on the factory machines for the first time. The sound filled the empty room with promise. He tried making dried fruit snacks, but the first batches spoiled quickly. The texture was wrong, and shopkeepers returned the samples. Failure came fast, but it also came cheap. His mother was worried. She told him the bakery was safer. She begged him not to waste the family's money on experiments. Relatives laughed at him, but Stanley reminded himself that experiments are how you learn. Every failure is feedback. At the bakery, Samson ignored feedback. When customers complained about high prices, he said quality would win them back. When they asked for smaller loaves, he said tradition mattered more. But ignoring the customer's voice does not stop reality. It only speeds up decline. By the end of the month, Samson had shelves of unsold bread. Stanley had bags of spoiled fruit. Both brothers felt pressure building. One was holding too tightly to the past. The other was stumbling toward the future. And the market, as always, was teaching them both a hard truth. In business, pride is expensive. Learning is cheap. Stanley decided to change his approach. Instead of producing blindly, he started asking questions. He spoke to shopkeepers, to children, and even to parents. He asked what snacks sold fastest, which ones spoiled, and which ones were trusted most. The answers surprised him. Children wanted snacks they could share easily without making a mess. Shopkeepers wanted items that lasted longer on the shelf. Parents cared about labels. They wanted simple, clean ingredients. These small answers gave Stanley a new direction. At the bakery, Samson believed he already knew his customers. He thought loyalty was guaranteed. When one young buyer asked for smaller, cheaper loaves, he dismissed the request. When another asked for coffee to go, he ignored it. Assumptions blinded him. Stanley sketched a new idea. A packet of dried fruit, small enough for a child's hand, easy to share with less waste. He promised himself to make it cheap, tidy, and clear. A small experiment that might win trust. Samson, meanwhile, wrote a long list of improvements for the bakery. Delivery, coffee service, new signs. But he did not test them. He only imagined them. And imagination without feedback is just hope. The brothers stood on opposite paths. One was listening, adjusting, and moving slowly toward the customer. The other was assuming, resisting, and moving further away. And the market, as always, spoke the final truth. In business, the customer's voice is the only compass. Stanley worked late into the night at the factory. He used simple tools: scissors, paper strips, tape. He wrapped small packs of dried mango and wrote the date on each one. They did not look perfect, but they looked possible. This was his first minimum viable product, an MVP. The next day, he carried the small packs to a school. At lunch, he handed them out to children. Some chewed happily. Some shared with friends. Some even asked if he had more. The experiment was rough, but it gave him proof. Meanwhile, Samson made a bigger bet. He borrowed money to renovate part of the bakery. He added new shelves, a fresh sign, and expensive equipment. But he never tested if customers wanted any of it. The bakery looked better, but sales stayed the same. Stanley wrote down every reaction. Which snacks were eaten first, which were ignored, and what children said about taste. Feedback became his raw material. Every small test gave him direction. Cheap lessons, quick lessons, useful lessons. Samson believed quality alone would bring customers back. But quality without discovery is blind. He spent more money, but he learned nothing new. He was scaling without a model. And scaling without learning is like running into the dark. By the end of the week, the difference was clear. Stanley had no real profits yet, but he had knowledge. Samson had no new knowledge, but he had new debt. One was moving slowly, one was moving blindly. And the market rewarded only one thing: learning. At the bakery, Samson faced growing frustration. The old workers had served his father for years. They respected tradition, but they also saw customers disappearing. Some whispered that Samson was too rigid. A few even said they might leave for better opportunities. Meanwhile, Stanley leaned on his best friend for help. Together, they delivered snack samples around town on bicycles. Some days the snacks were received well. Other days people refused them. And once, a batch spoiled under the sun, and parents grew angry. The failure cut deep. Stanley thought about closing the factory. His best friend reminded him that mistakes are part of the process. Feedback, even when harsh, is a teacher. But doubt lingered in Stanley's mind. At home, their mother grew restless. She scolded Stanley for wasting time. She begged Samson to protect the family name. Her words made both brothers feel the weight of their father's shadow. Samson carried guilt each night when he saw unsold bread on the shelves. He worked harder, but harder was not the same as smarter. Tradition without adjustment became a burden, and his pride made it harder to admit mistakes. Stanley, on the other hand, struggled with fear. He was learning, but slowly, and failure was loud. He questioned whether his experiments were worth the pain. Innovation without resilience is fragile, and resilience requires courage to continue. By the end of the month, both brothers felt trapped. Samson by his pride, Stanley by his doubt. Family tension rose, friendships were tested, and hope seemed thinner each day. The lesson was clear. Business is never just numbers. It is people, pride, doubt, and trust. And when those are shaken, the real test begins. Tension between Samson and Stanley grew heavier each week. First, it was silence. Then silence became small arguments. And small arguments became loud clashes. Samson believed Stanley was reckless. He said experiments were a waste of money. He said customers needed stability, not guesses. In his mind, the factory was dishonoring their father's legacy. Stanley believed Samson was blind. He said tradition was killing the bakery. He said assumptions were more dangerous than experiments. In his mind, the bakery was being buried alive by pride. The family felt the strain. Their mother stopped visiting the factory. She spent her afternoons at the bakery instead. Relatives sided with Samson, praising tradition, calling him the true heir. Stanley felt like an outcast in his own home. The workers noticed too. Bakery staff grew restless, whispering about their jobs. Shopkeepers avoided Stanley's snacks, afraid the business wouldn't last. The community could sense the division, and division weakens trust. Weeks passed without the brothers speaking directly. Each carried his own vision like a weapon. Each was determined to prove the other wrong. But markets are not battlefields. Markets reward those who listen, not those who fight. The lesson was clear. Ego blinds entrepreneurs faster than failure ever could.
If you're enjoying this story, pause for a moment. Hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed. That way you won't miss the next story filled with business lessons like this one.
Samson believed expansion would save the bakery. He took a large loan and opened a second branch across town. The new shop was bigger, brighter, and more expensive. But the customers did not come. The location was wrong and the debt grew fast. Back at the first bakery, shelves stayed full. Unsold bread turned into waste each evening. The staff grew worried about their wages. And Samson realized too late that he had scaled without a model. Stanley faced his own crisis. The supermarket agreed to test his snacks on their shelves. It was the chance he had been waiting for. But within a week, most packets were returned. The packaging was inconsistent, and customers ignored them. The rejection crushed him. All his experiments felt wasted. His mother shook her head and said, "This is why tradition is safer." But tradition was failing too. Both brothers were losing ground in different ways. The bakery risked losing the family home, which was tied to the loan. The factory risked closing completely, with no buyer for the machines. It felt like the family name itself was collapsing. The market had exposed them both. Samson had scaled too soon. Stanley had not yet built consistency. And in that moment of failure, the truth was clear. Business punishes pride and untested ambition alike. News of the failures spread quickly. Neighbors whispered. Relatives shook their heads, and employees feared the end. The family's pride seemed ready to collapse along with both businesses. One evening, an old friend of their father came to visit. He was not wealthy, but he was wise. He reminded the brothers of something their father often said: "A failed attempt is not the end. It is only a lesson for the next attempt." The words stayed with them. For the first time in months, Samson and Stanley sat together. The silence was heavy, but heavier still was the debt, the wasted stock, and the fear of losing everything. Stanley spoke first. He shared what he had learned from customers. Children wanted small, tidy snacks, shopkeepers wanted longer shelf life, and parents wanted clean labels. He admitted his packaging was poor, but his discovery was real. Samson listened quietly. He admitted the bakery was drowning. He said tradition alone was not enough. His expansion had failed because he scaled without proof, and debt was now a weight he could not carry alone. The brothers realized they had been fighting the wrong battle. It was not bakery against factory. It was the family against the market, and the only way forward was together. The lesson was simple. In business, failure can divide, but it can also unite. If you learn from it, failure becomes the turning point. The next morning, the brothers began again. This time, not as rivals, but as partners. Samson brought the bakery name, its loyal customers, and its trusted recipes. Stanley brought the factory, his notes from experiments, and the courage to test again. They agreed on a new plan. The bakery would remain the face of the family business. The factory would supply new packaged snacks under the bakery's trusted name. Together, they would combine tradition with innovation. The workers saw the change. Bakery staff were trained to help with packaging. Factory helpers were asked to suggest improvements. Not every idea worked, but every voice was heard. And when people feel included, they work harder. The first test was simple. Small packets of biscuits made with the bakery's dough. The packaging was tidy, the label was clear, and the price was fair. This time, shopkeepers welcomed the product, and parents gave nods of approval. Samson learned the value of testing before spending. Stanley learned the discipline of building slowly. Each brother carried the other's weakness, and together they built strength. Within weeks, sales began to rise. The bakery had lines again. The factory machines no longer sat silent. The community saw hope return, and the family name began to recover. The lesson was clear. Great businesses are built when stability meets experimentation. Tradition keeps trust. Innovation keeps growth. Together, they keep a company alive. Months passed, and the family business began to breathe again. The bakery was no longer just a shop. It became the trusted face of a new brand. The factory was no longer a silent room. It became the heart of production. Samson no longer chased tradition alone. He learned to test before he expanded. He discovered that quality matters, but discovery matters more. Every small test was now a shield against failure. Stanley no longer chased experiments without discipline. He learned to slow down and build consistency. He discovered that ideas matter, but structure matters more. Every new idea was now tested with care before release. The community noticed the change. Shopkeepers displayed the packets proudly. Parents trusted the labels. Children carried the snacks to school, asking for more. The bakery lines returned, and the family name regained honor. The brothers stood side by side. They no longer argued about past versus future. They had built a bridge between both, and on that bridge, the business stood firm. The lesson was clear. Great companies are not inherited. They are rebuilt every day through learning, discipline, and courage. That is how tradition survives, and that is how innovation grows.